This is the story of the most dangerous serial killer in South Korea's history. A killer who terrorized an entire town for years, leaving behind nothing but bodies and empty fields. The police couldn't catch him, the people couldn't escape him, and for decades no one even knew who he really was. Because the most terrifying part wasn't how he killed. It was the fact that he was living among them the entire time. In the late months of 1986, a quiet rural town in South Korea was about to face something it had never seen before. Deep inside Gyeonggi Province, the small farming town of Hwaseong suddenly became the center of a nightmare. Women began to disappear, and soon after, their bodies started appearing in the fields under horrifying conditions. What followed over the next 5 years would become one of the most disturbing serial murder cases the country had ever known. For generations, Hwaseong had been a peaceful agricultural town where life moved slowly and predictably. Farmers worked from sunrise until sunset, and once darkness fell, the streets became empty and silent. There were no bright city lights, no noise, just open land and long stretches of shadow. It was the kind of place where people believed nothing truly bad could ever happen. But places like this often hide something deeper beneath their calm surface. When there are no witnesses, no cameras, and no one nearby, the darkness becomes something else entirely. It stretches further, feels heavier, and carries a different kind of silence. And sometimes, that silence is hiding something alive. Everything changed on September 10th, 1986. A 71-year-old woman named Lee went out to visit her daughter, just like she had done many times before. The visit was simple and peaceful, filled with normal conversation and comfort. As evening approached, she said goodbye and began her walk home before nightfall. On her way back, she passed a small cabbage field and decided to pick one for dinner. She told her daughter it would only take a minute before she headed home. It was a small, harmless decision that no one would ever question. But that decision would become the last normal moment of her life. At first, her family wasn't worried when she didn't arrive home. They assumed she had stayed longer or stopped somewhere along the way. But when they called her daughter, they learned she had already left hours earlier. That's when a quiet sense of fear began to grow. The roads between houses were dark and empty, with no lights to guide the way. The farmland stretched endlessly in every direction, silent and still. Her family began searching, calling her name into the darkness. But the only thing that answered them was silence. Neighbors joined in, bringing flashlights and spreading across the fields. Beams of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but crops and shadows. Every sound became suspicious, every movement unsettling. But there was still no sign of her anywhere. Eventually, the family reported her missing to the police. But the case wasn't treated with urgency, and time slowly slipped away. Days passed without any answers, and the town tried to return to normal. Then, 4 days later, everything changed. A man named Kim was walking along a path he normally avoided. As he passed through the crops, something strange caught his eye between the plants. At first, it looked like someone lying in the field, possibly injured. Concerned, he rushed closer to help. But the closer he got, the more something felt wrong. The position of the body wasn't natural. The silence around it felt heavier than it should have. And when he finally saw clearly, he stopped moving completely. What he was looking at wasn't someone who needed help. It was the lifeless body of the missing woman. She had been left there, hidden just enough to avoid being seen immediately. and the way she had been left behind was deeply disturbing. Police arrived shortly after and confirmed her identity. The scene was unlike anything they had dealt with before. She had been stripped of her clothes, her hands tied behind her back. Her face was covered with her own blouse. One of her socks had been wrapped tightly around her neck. The forensic team later confirmed she had been strangled to death. There were also clear signs she had been sexually assaulted before she died. The brutality of it made no sense. There was no clear motive, no personal conflict, and almost no evidence left behind. It was as if the killer had planned everything perfectly. He had appeared, committed the crime, and vanished without a trace. And that made the situation even more terrifying. Despite how serious the case was, only a small number of detectives were assigned to it. Most police resources were focused elsewhere at the time. In a quiet rural town, the case didn't receive the attention it needed. Slowly it began to fade. Weeks passed without progress, and people tried to move on. Life returned to its slow rhythm, and the fields became quiet again. But something had changed beneath the surface, because the killer wasn't finished. On October 20th, another woman named Park Yoon-suk disappeared after leaving work. She was last seen walking home from a bus stop after saying goodbye to a friend. It was a short, familiar path she had taken many times before. But that night, she never made it home. 3 days later, children playing near an irrigation canal made a horrifying discovery. Inside the canal lay the body of a young woman. They ran screaming to tell their parents, their voices filled with panic. When police arrived, they immediately recognized the pattern. The victim had been stripped, strangled with her own sock, and assaulted. It was identical to the first case. This time, however, there were signs she had fought back. Bruises and wounds showed that she had tried to resist. That was the moment investigators realized the truth. This was not a random act of violence. They were dealing with a serial killer, and he was still out there. But instead of informing the public, authorities kept the connection quiet. They feared panic would spread through the town. Meanwhile, the killer remained free, watching and waiting, and silence gave him the advantage. Weeks later, a woman stumbled out of a field, injured and terrified. A nearby family heard her cries and rushed to help her. She was shaking, barely able to speak, and clearly in shock. But she had survived. She told police that a man had approached her from behind and threatened her with a knife. He forced her to walk through dark farmland, far away from any lights. Every step she took was controlled by him, and she knew if she resisted, she would die. When he became distracted searching for her belongings, she saw her chance. Without thinking, she ran. She ran through the darkness, through mud and branches, not knowing where she was going. But somehow, she escaped. For the first time, police had a description. A man in his 20s, average height, thin build, nothing particularly unique. A sketch was created and shared throughout the town. But it didn't make people feel safer. Fear spread quickly across Hwaseong. People stopped walking alone at night. Families locked their doors earlier than ever before. And for a while, the killer disappeared. Weeks passed, then months, and no new victims were found. Slowly, people began to believe it was over, that maybe the nightmare had ended. But they were wrong. 5 months later, another body appeared, then another. Each victim was found in the same condition. The pattern never changed. Investigators connected older missing cases to the same killer. The number of victims continued to grow. Fear turned into paranoia. No one felt safe anymore. Some residents began patrolling the streets at night. Others left warnings in the fields. But none of it made a difference. The killer remained invisible. Police mapped out the crime locations and discovered something chilling. Every murder had occurred within a small radius. The killer was likely living among them. Even with that knowledge, they had no strong suspects. The investigation stalled once again. Then another victim was taken on a rainy night. She had been waiting near a bus stop before disappearing. Her body was later found, showing the same signs as the others. The pattern remained consistent. The killer never changed his method. Then suddenly the murders stopped again. For more than a year, there were no new victims. Some believed the killer was gone. Others thought he was waiting. In 1988, he returned. Another victim was found, identical to the rest. Rumors spread about patterns and choices. Police tried to set traps. But the killer never showed himself. Suspects were arrested, then released. The case grew more frustrating, and then something even worse happened. In 1989, a young girl was murdered inside her own home. This changed everything. The killer had entered a house while the family was still there. It meant nowhere was safe anymore. Investigators examined the scene carefully. They found evidence showing how he had broken in silently. Inside the room, they discovered strands of hair that didn't belong to the victim. This became a crucial clue. For the first time, they had something physical to work with. DNA analysis revealed new information about the suspect. Thousands of men were investigated based on this clue. The list grew larger and larger. Eventually, a suspect confessed to the crimes. The town believed it was finally over, but something didn't feel right. The man had physical limitations that didn't match the attacks. Even he insisted he was innocent. Years later, it was proven he was telling the truth. The real killer had never been caught. He had been free the entire time, living somewhere among them, watching everything. Decades passed before the truth finally came out. In 2019, advanced DNA testing allowed old evidence to be re-examined. This time there was a match. The real killer was a man named Lee Chun-ji. He had lived a completely normal life on the surface. No one ever suspected him. But beneath that normal life, something dark had been growing for years. His past trauma had shaped him into something dangerous, something capable of unimaginable violence. He was responsible for multiple murders and assaults. For years, he avoided detection completely. The town had lived alongside him without ever knowing, and that was the most terrifying part of all. Not just what he did, but how easily he blended in, how normal he seemed. Because sometimes the most dangerous monsters don't look like monsters. They don't hide in shadows or make themselves known. They live quietly. They watch. They wait. And when the moment is right, they strike.